For many of you, the legacy of the genocide reverberates through your daily lives, through stories relayed to you by relatives, by family friends. But for many of your neighbors and friends in Watertown, the story of the genocide is a complete unknown. It's not part of their daily lives. We felt that as the 100th anniversary of the genocide approached, it would be good to choose an accessible book that would generate an understanding of the history of the genocide and foster conversation between diverse populations here in our community. In August of 1939, as Adolf Hitler issued his orders to invade Poland, thus beginning World War II, he told his generals that once they controlled the land, no one would care any longer what they had done to gain control. And he famously quipped, "Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" We're here today reading this book, talking about this centennial, by means of saying to the world, we in this room and in this community remember the annihilation of the Armenians, and we won't forget. Chris Bohjalian is here to speak to us tonight about the Armenian Genocide and about his experience writing the Sandcastle Girls. In addition to this book, he's written 16 others. 10 of his last 12 have been New York Times bestsellers. His books have been translated into 30 languages, including Armenian, and 3 have been made into films. Just in case anyone's wondering, he tells me his favorite food is cheese porridge. So we'll have an opportunity to sample some food. Please join me in welcoming Chris Bohjalian.
Thank you, Jill, for that lovely introduction. It is a pleasure, it is an honor, it is a privilege to be in Watertown, Massachusetts. Thank you so much for your faith in my work. It is a particular honor to be here tonight because I'm not on a book tour. Book tours are supposed to be unbelievably glamorous. You jet around the country and you hang with Diane Reeves and Katie Couric and sell whole pallets of books. But the reality of most book tours is this. By day 17, you will have been on 18 regional jets, and you will have been reduced to wearing a strange man's underwear. Wish I could say I'm making that up. I'm not. Really happened to me on the Secrets of Eden book tour a couple of years ago. You see, the thing about a book tour is this. A publisher wants to get you to as many cities as possible, as quickly as possible, so you spend one night in every city. Monday's Boston, Tuesday's New York, Wednesday's Chicago, Thursday's Denver, etc. One night, one hotel, one city. If you are a novelist, however, there's nothing in the world you want more than 2 nights in a row, in the same hotel, in the same city for one reason, and one reason only, laundry. You need that second full day to get your laundry taken care of. So what happened to me in the Secrets of Eden book tour was this. I arrived in Minneapolis, St. Paul, after 14 consecutive days on the road in 14 different hotels. I am happier than I've been in 2 weeks because I see I am not checking out until Sunday morning. So the first thing I do is I send out a Mini Cooper-sized pile of laundry, do my event Friday night, I have 2 events on Saturday, get back to my hotel room Saturday night about 10 o'clock, and there, on the bed under plastic, are all of my shirts, which have been dry cleaned, and a box with my laundry. Since I'm checking out first thing Sunday morning, I open my suitcase on the floor, and then I open the box on the bed, planning to move my laundry in one neat and tidy brick from the box to the suitcase on the floor. So I open it up, and in there are 14 pairs of underwear, not mine. Not a man's. They belonged to a very petite woman. I've done this long enough to know that rule number 1 of a book tour is this. You never give the hotel all of your underwear, still 3 pairs, not in crisis mode. So now Sunday morning I'm checking out. And because it's Sunday, the hotel laundry is closed. So I give these 14 pairs of women's underwear to the bellman. And I said to him, I know your laundry is closed today, but when it opens on Monday, if you find my underwear, could you please send it by Federal Express to this hotel in Orlando, Florida, where I will be on Tuesday, and we both looked at each other like, yeah, that's going to happen. Then I check out. Whenever you're on a book tour, your publisher gives you an escort. Not that kind. These are really lovely women and men who know where the libraries, the bookstores, the TV stations are. They get you to all the places you need to go, and they bring you to and from the airport. In Minneapolis, it's a great guy named Tim Jennings. So Tim picks me up, and I said to Tim, by any miracle, is there a store open now between here and the airport where we can get some new underwear? And he said two things to me that were kind of interesting. The first thing he said was, wow, you're like the third author I've had this month who needs new underwear. And he said, yeah, there's the Filenes. We're going to have to be really fast. So we get to the Filenes, I race to the men's department, I get my underwear, it's a little brown Filenes bag, and we race to the airport. Nobody flies through airport security as quickly as a novelist on a book tour. You throw the shoes, the cell phone, the laptop on a conveyor belt, and you fly through the metal detector, and I did all of that. Also putting on the conveyor belt that brown Filenes bag of underwear. So now I'm boarding regional jet number whatever for Milwaukee. And I realize I no longer have my Filenes bag of underwear. How do I know this? I hear the following over the airport loudspeakers. With the gentleman who left his underwear through security. Bedlam in the gate. Oh my gosh, they really are strip searching us. Didn't go back for it. Flew into Milwaukee, lovely event, had a nice event. Monday in Madison. And now, it's Tuesday. And I arrive in Orlando, Florida, check into the hotel, and the woman behind the counter says to me, Mr. Bohjalian, I have a Federal Express box for you from Minneapolis, St. Paul. So I cradle this box against my chest as if it is Christmas morning. Go racing up to my hotel room, and I rip it open. And sure enough, in there are 14 pairs of underwear, not mine. But they're man's, they're clean, and they're boxers. And so I was grateful to have them. And I did the last week of the Secrets of Eden book tour in a strange man's underwear. Which of course brings us to my work, to our work together this evening. I am indeed going to be talking about the Sandcastle Girls, and I hope bringing you with me both through the origins of the story, why I wrote it, my family, imagined and real. I want to begin with a story that bears directly upon the origins, the structure, and the text of the Sandcastle Girls. Behold, my mother and father. My father was Armenian, 100%. My mother was Swedish, 100%. And while that means, in theory, that my mother was the Odog, or the outsider, at all the big, wonderful gatherings of the Armenian half of my family, the fact is my mother was never, ever the outsider. She absolutely adored her Armenian mother and father-in-law, and my Armenian grandparents adored their blonde, blue-eyed daughter-in-law. Exhibit A, my mother's keychain. You need to know that my mother was unbelievably superstitious. She would not leave the house without her keychain. Now, she died many, many years ago. My father died more recently. As a matter of fact, he died the summer before the Sandcastle Girls was published. So when I was going through all of the items on my father's dresser that he had a totemic connection with, I came across my mother's keychain. And on it were 3 items: a St. Jude medal, a St. Christopher medal, and a bronze charm of the nation-state of Armenia. Exhibit B. I grew up in Westchester, always within about 20 minutes of my Armenian grandparents who lived in Tuckahoe. On Saturday mornings when I was a little boy, while my father was coaching my older brother's Little League baseball team or playing golf with his buddies, my mother would bring me to my grandparents' house, where the three adults would tell stories and drink coffee and have Armenian pastries, and I would listen in quite contentedly. At some point over the seasons, for reasons that are inexplicable, my mother started having me sing for my grandparents. Inexplicable because I could not sing then, and I certainly cannot sing then. And over time, these impromptu concerts grew more elaborate, until suddenly my mother was having me sing for the entire Armenian half of my family when we would be gathered together after church on Easter or Christmas or Thanksgiving. Now, you need to know that I was a fat kid, not morbidly obese, but so fat that my mother bought me all of my pants at a store in Stamford, Connecticut called Greenberg's Husky Boys Shop. And still, she had to cuff my pants up to my knees. So now here's the story. It's Easter Sunday, 5 years old, and for this concert, at my Armenian grandparents' house, my mother has dressed me up in a pair of red velvet knickers, no cuffs, and a white turtleneck shirt, because she wants me to look British, because for this Sunday, she's going to have me sing the Herman's pop classic, I'm Henry VIII, I Am. Yep, a fat kid in red velvet knickers singing Herman's with a bad British accent. I ask you, how is it that my Armenian cousins never beat me up? Now, for those of you who read the Sandcastle Girls, you will recognize that memory from page 1. And the story is also relevant tonight, though, because that living room in which I am singing is exotic, not simply by the standards of the late 1960s, but by the 1930s when my father was a little boy. Plush oriental carpets, my grandmother's beautiful, intricate, ornate Armenian lacework everywhere, floor-to-ceiling bookcases with books in a language, an alphabet I could not begin to decipher. Behind the brick walls of that monolith, my favorite of all the houses I or anyone in my extended family lived in when I was growing up, everyone spoke Armenian. When my father was 5 years old and started elementary school in Tuckahoe, he couldn't speak a word of English. Couldn't even ask where the boys' room was. And so, like many daughters and sons of immigrants, my father made a decision. He decided he would reinvent himself. He would become as American as he possibly could. And as a matter of fact, by the 1950s, he became that most iconic of mid-20th century American business professionals, an ad man. A madman. Think Don Draper with less hair. That is how extensive my father's reinvention was. In 1988, he and my mother retired to South Florida. In 2009, long a widower, his health began to fail. And if there's a silver lining in the myriad ailments that dogged him the last years of his life, it was this. We spent a lot more time together. I would fly down from Vermont every 3 or 4 weeks, meet with his doctors, hit a bucket of golf balls with him if he felt up to it. And always, we would look at the old family photographs, including the oldest family photograph in the Bohjalian family archives. I bring you to Kayseri, last decade of the 19th century. Kayseri is a couple of hours southeast of Ankara. And I want to draw your attention to two of the players in this photograph. Little boy on his father's lap, that is Levon Nazareth, my grandfather. His father, Nazareth Bedros. We'll come back to Nazareth a little later, but I want to flash forward 35 to 37 years to New York City, to my favorite photograph I have of my father and my grandparents. That little boy is now the patriarch himself. He's in the suit. I love this picture of my father. The short pants, the big wide ears, the necktie that falls 3 inches above his navel. Standing behind him is my grandmother, Haigui Shadinian, elegant gray-black dress, corsage the size of a softball. In my beautiful grandmother, I can see wisps of my beautiful 21-year-old daughter, Grace, Experience. And yes, sitting beside them, Levon Nazareth. He's wearing a suit. In my memories, he is always wearing a suit. One day I asked his daughter, my Aunt Rosemary, I said, Aunt Rosemary, when I think of Grandpa, when growing up, he's always wearing a suit. When you were a little girl, was he always wearing a suit? And she laughed and said, Chris, of course not. I remember one day when he was cleaning the oil burner, he took off his jacket. Levon and Haigui were survivors of the Armenian Genocide. Like so many survivors, they took most of their stories to their graves. We know bits and pieces. We know my grandmother, Haigui Shadinian. Her father, he provided cavalry horses to the Ottoman army and had for years. In 1915, rather than acquire the horses legally, they simply shot him to death, confiscated the herd, confiscated the horse farm, and then for good measure, confiscated the Shadinian home. My father, my grandfather, Levon, he had 3 brothers. And in 1915, they were all alive and in Cairo. And yet somehow, between 1915 and the mid-1920s, when my grandparents wed in Paris, all 3 brothers were lost to the mists of history. We know nothing of what happened to them to this day. Now, the Sandcastle Girls is not the first time that I tried to write a novel of the Armenian Genocide. I tried in 1992 and 1993, wrote the entire manuscript, 392 pages. When I finished reading it, I realized it was a train wreck, unpublishable. Moreover, about this time, Carol Edgadian had published her remarkable novel of the genocide, Rise the Euphrates. And I thought to myself, why in the name of heaven does anyone need my take on the story when we have the work of Carol Edgadian, Peter Balakian, and of course Franz Werfel's magisterial epic, The 40 Days of Musadab? And so, I sent that manuscript to my alma mater, where it sits in the archives, and you can read it there if you're a scholar or a masochist. But life is short, it's a bad book. So why did I try again, beginning in 2010? Well, first of all, because the story is so profoundly important. There's a direct link between the Armenian Genocide, the Holocaust, the Cambodian killing fields, Bosnia, Rwanda, Darfur. Secondly, because while today, for so much of North America, the Armenian Genocide has become, as my narrator Laura Petrosian calls it in the Sandcastle Girls, the slaughter you know next to nothing about. Once upon a time, all North American eyes were turned upon the fraying edges of the Ottoman Empire and looking on aghast. There were best-selling books, Bleeding Armenia. Best-selling books, Armenian Massacres. Best-selling books, Ravish Armenia, a memoir. The story of Aurora Mardiganian. Aurora survives the death marches, emigrates to the United States, publishes her memoir. It's a bestseller, and in fact becomes an 8-reel Hollywood blockbuster. To this day, 1 reel exists. You can see it at the Genocide Museum in Yerevan, at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and a portion of it even on YouTube. And what do you see in that portion on YouTube? Hollywood's recreation of the moment in the memoir when Aurora watched women on the caravan with her, stripped naked, nailed to wooden crosses, and crucified under the searing Syrian sun. In the 1920s, everyone in North America rallied behind Near East Relief, this country's first great humanitarian outreach effort Americans saved at least 130,000 Armenian children thanks to Near East relief. The New York Times alone ran 154 articles off the front page about the genocide as it was occurring, culminating in his front page story from July 13th, 1919. The death sentence and the conviction for crimes against humanity for the three architects of the genocide. Once upon a time, all North America knew. But the news cycles moved on. There was the rise of the Soviet Union, and the fledgling nation-state of Armenia was subsumed by the Soviet Union. There was the rise of Nazi Germany. There was the Great Depression. And in 1923, there was the second post-war Turkish government, the Ataturk government, that with Stalin-like fanaticism began to rewrite history and sweep under the rug the Ottoman regime's systematic annihilation of 1.5 million Armenians, 300,000 Assyrians, and at least 100,000 Greeks. The Armenian Genocide. Once upon a time, everyone knew. But within 20 years, as Jill shared with you, within 20 years from this front page story, August 22nd, 1939, Adolf Hitler famously commanded his officers before unleashing his panzers on Poland, "Be merciless! Be merciless!" After all, who today remembers the annihilation of the Armenians? And so today, for most of the world, our story exists, but in the ruins. These are actually photographs that I've taken across the Anatolian plains in western Armenia, aka Turkey, in Chankush. The monasteries that dot Lake Van. The Dudon Crevasse. We're going to come back to the Dudon Crevasse in a few minutes, where 10,000 Armenians were executed by Kurdish and Ottoman killing parties in a 3-day period. And Deir Zor, where to this day you can run your hand through the sand and come away with fragments of skull and bone. So when I decided to try again, I decided I needed to make some very conscious and different decisions. And the first thing I needed to do with the book that would become the Sandcastle Girls was create a female version of me, an Armenian-American novelist at midlife who knows far too little of her own ancestry. Someone who can explain to readers in Indianapolis or Fort Lauderdale or Houston, Texas, what the Armenian Genocide was. As Laura says, what she wants to do is create the Armenian Genocide for dummies. Replace the word ukulele with Armenian Genocide, replace the ukulele with a lute, with an oud, an Armenian lute. The other thing, however, that Laura can do is she can explain to her readers this cataclysmic crime occurred beginning in 1915 and you don't know about it. But don't feel bad. You don't know about it because there has been nearly a century of conscious, complicitous, conspiratorial denial. This is actually an op-ed that I had in the Boston Globe about 2.5 weeks ago. It is all about Turkey's it's the Turkish government, I always like to stress, it's the Turkish government's sociopathic denial of their predecessors' crimes. And Laura can do that. She can say what happened and she can explain why you don't know. But the other thing I wanted to do is this. No one is going to read a novel called 1.5 Million Dead in the Desert. I've always loved big, sweeping, epic love stories. Love stories set in the midst of cataclysm. Love stories such as The English Patient. And I've gone with the movie poster here, not the dust jacket, because note the biplane. It's coming back. Love stories such as Atonement. You know, what do these books have in common? Big, sweeping, epic love stories set before and during the Second World War. So I decided that Laura was going to be writing a memoir of sorts about her grandparents and their remarkable love in the midst of the Armenian Genocide in Aleppo, 1915. And to further make sure that North Americans read this book, I decided that Laura's grandmother was going to be an American girl. Mount Holyoke, class of 1915. A Boston Brahmin's daughter who joins her father and the Boston-based Friends of Armenia to go to Aleppo to bring aid to the Armenians there. And there she meets the Armenian, Armenian Petrosian, an engineer, a widower, so he believes, looking for any trace of his family in Aleppo. And of course there, Elizabeth and Armin fall in love. What links their love story in the past with Laura in the present? Watertown. When Laura is in college, she ventures to the Armenian Library and Museum of America, where she sees a photograph of a woman, one of those photographs very much like some of the images that Armin Wegener gave us, the Dildilians gave us, and the photo stays in her mind. When years later she sees the photo again in an exhibit near here at Harvard, this time it is a caption. And when she sees the photo with a caption, she realizes this may be an ancestor. So the book is at once a love story and a detective story moving back and forth in time. And I love the way that the love story portion of this book has been captured in some of the overseas foreign editions. And I thought I would show you the United Kingdom edition of the Sandcastle Girls. I've christened this cover Downton Abbey Meets the English Patient. Upper left-hand corner, the biplane is back. The Norwegian edition, which was published in January, Sandcastles in Aleppo. I love this cover because it shows Aleppo. The Aleppo of my young lovers, Elizabeth and Armin. The Aleppo that any of us in this room could have seen as late as January 2011, which now tragically, horrifically, cataclysmically is gone. Most of the overseas editions, however, replicate the American cover. This is the Brazilian edition published about 2 weeks ago. Elizabeth Endicott, woman in white, staring off at Der Zor, desert of bones. Now there's a third reason why I tried again in 2010 to write this book. And he's not with us tonight because he's speaking in Paris, but for years he lived in this community here in Watertown. My great friend Hachig Maradi. Hachig was the editor of the Armenian Weekly for 7 years before becoming a genocide scholar at Rutgers. Hachig knew two things about me in 2010 when we were having a cup of coffee one day. He knew I had tried and failed to write a novel of the Armenian Genocide, and he knew that my father's health was failing. And he said, when are you going to try again? Not if, not are you, but when. And if you know Hachig, you know he's nothing if not persistent. And so I did try again. And since the book has been published, if I've had any doubts that this is the right structure, my fears have gone away in my travels throughout the Armenian communities, the Middle East, through Western Armenia, and of course through Armenia. I remember the first time that I went to Beirut, I was traveling with Hachig. Now some of you might know Hachig. My wife is great friends with him too, and one day she was scrolling through his Facebook feed and she said, have you ever noticed that Hachig is the best person in the world to travel with? And I said, why do you say that? She looked up at me and she said, he's always eating really, really well. He is. And then she added and looked up at me, raised an eyebrow, and said, and he's always traveling with unbelievably beautiful women. That's Hachig. And he's a great person to travel with, but also because he's really smart. He's huge of heart, and he knows everybody. And of course, the first time we went to Beirut together, the first thing we did was eat. We weren't naked. But the main reason I wanted to get to Beirut was I wanted to get to Antelias. I wanted to get to the Armenian Genocide Memorial Chapel. Because when you walk in the doors, you are greeted by 3 glass-paned windows, behind which are but a homeopathic fragment of the skulls and the bones pulled from Der Zor. I wanted to get up the coast to Jabal, to Biblios, the bird's nest orphanage. Orphanage, of course, sprang up after the genocide across the Middle East And this is one of the really spectacular ones in terms of the good that it did. It was started by Maria Jacobsen, a Danish missionary. She's credited with saving 3,200 Armenian boys and girls. Why is it called the Bird's Nest? She saw a photograph of herself giving candy to the children, skeletal from their deprivations in the desert. And she said, look at them. Look at them. They're like baby birds, and I'm like a mama bird. And the name stuck. And it is always so important for me when I think of this book, when I travel through Western Armenia. This is actually census figures and a plaque that you can see 2 blocks from here at the Armenian Library at Museum of America. I carry it with me on my iPhone to share with people when they ask the definition of ethnic cleansing. What is important to know about this for purposes of tonight is that while you see over 2 million Armenians according to the census figures in 1914 and not quite 400,000 in 1922, most of the Armenian population figures in 1922 will be 0, 2, and 3 years. And I'll draw your attention to but one number, 500. In the Sandcastle Girls, you will recall that Armenian Petrosian, prior to going to Aleppo, is part of the Armenian defense of Van. And that was by design. It was by design because I wanted to flip the notion of Armenian victimhood on its head, which is why Armenian Petrosian is quite the avenging angel in the Sandcastle Girls, and he cuts his teeth as a warrior in Van. 197,000 Armenians there in 1914, 500 in 1922. This is the fortress today in Van. It looks down upon the Rose City, which was the Armenian quarter. This is Gaduz, one of my favorite spots in the world, the homes of our reverend fathers, now homes for seagulls and graffiti. Another Armenian school and monastery and church complex in Van. This is what it looks like today. This is what it looked like in 1910. When you travel even to Diyarbakir, known in the Armenian community today for the miraculous restoration of Sirkidagos, you see that our cemeteries have been ransacked and sledgehammered. And while Sirkidagos has been restored, 3 blocks away, the Armenian church looks like this. Now, the last stage of the genocide is denial. And I heard somebody say Ani. This looks like Ani. It's actually not Ani, but it is near Ani. It is in the Kars region. It is St. Sarkis. This was a 5-church monastic complex, which was completely intact in 1953. In 1954, the Turkish army dynamited the complex. They dynamited a great many churches in the 1950s, because when you are ethnically cleansing an area, you don't simply eliminate the people, you try to eliminate any trace of people. My wife is convinced that the only reason St. Sarkis remains is because they ran out of dynamite and didn't want to climb back down that long ravine. And yes, that is my wife and my daughter and my great friend, Hachik. Now, I mentioned to you earlier the Dudon crevasse by Chankush. You saw looking down. This is looking up from halfway down. Here's what the history books said happened in Chankush. 10,000 Armenians over a 3-day period were shot or stabbed, and their bodies tossed to the bottom, not merely of the gorge, but the crevasse at the bottom of the gorge. On my first visit to Chankush, when we were leaving the village, a Kurdish gentleman, a little older than me, knocked on our van door. There were about 7 of us in the van. And he said, "Don't leave. You have to meet my mother-in-law." Our Kurdish driver was afraid this was an abduction of sorts. But when this Kurdish gentleman said that his mother was 98 years old, and this was 2013, we all did the math. His mother-in-law was born in 1915. So we went to meet her. And thank goodness we did. The history books weren't precisely right. At least one woman was pulled from the line at the edge of the crevasse by one of the Kurdish executioners because he thought she was so beautiful. She had an infant in her arms. And so this Kurdish executioner decided he was going to marry her and raise her infant daughter as his own. And she is alive today. Asiya, last living Armenian in Chankush. And here's why this story is part of the great yin and yang of what has become the Sandcastle Girls for me. As Hatchik was interviewing her, Sarah Ajayan and Nairi Arzumanian were holding Asiya's hands. And Asiya kept looking at the seven of us saying, "You're Armenian. You're Armenian. You're really Armenian." And that's when I got it. Her son-in-law was a good man, a very good man. It's not that he wanted us to meet his mother-in-law. He wanted his mother-in-law to meet us, to see that while she is the last living Armenian in Chankush, the race continues. The Armenians are still alive. And here's why this is the great yin and yang for me. When I went back to Chankush in August of 2014, this time I had my wife and daughter with me. And while my first meeting of her was wrenching, my second visit was almost joyous, as if it were a family reunion, because we felt, in some ways, like family. And I will see her again late June, when my wife and my daughter and I will be returning once again to the area. And I'm always reassured that I've done the right thing with the structure of the Sandcastle Girls whenever I'm back in our beloved Armenia. All of the Armenians in the audience tonight will recognize these images, but I always know the importance of what I'm doing when I'm at the Armenian Genocide Memorial, when I'm laying flowers for the 1.5 million at the Eternal Flame, when I'm lighting candles for the Shalinians and the Bohjalians in Gekart, when I visit the rural public schools in Armenia. Just so you know, this is not a uniform. This particular school in Karakert knew I was coming, and they knew I'm into theater. And so they timed my visit so that I would be there when they were rehearsing a play they had written themselves. Those are costumes, not uniforms. When I see the fountains dance, listen to the komitas in Republic Square, and when I stand before William Saroyan, I might not have Saroyan's talent, but I sure have his hairline. And whenever I stand on this corner, why does the corner of Abovian and Autumn matter to me? Abovian, first great modern Armenian novelist, in Autumn, that was my father's name. Now I mentioned earlier the 40 days of Musadah, and why this is called We Are Still the Mountain. This has always been one of my most cherished books. And for those of you who don't know the story, this is the Reader's Digest condensed version. In 1915, Turkish gendarmes demanded that the 6 villages filled with Armenians on the mountain of Musadah congregate in their village squares for deportation. By this point, the Armenians knew often that deportation meant annihilation. So rather than assemble, they took their hunting rifles, went to the top of the mountain, and the first time the Turkish army tried to dislodge them, they did not take the Armenians seriously. With the result that the Armenians did not merely repulse the Turkish army, they commandeered 3 German-produced Krupp howitzers, a boatload of ammunition, and would proceed to hold off the Turkish army for 53 days. It is our community's Masada. At the end of 53 days, they were out of food, almost out of ammunition. And so the Armenian women created a number of Red Cross distress flags. The mountain of Musadah was on the southeast corner of what is today Turkey, on the Mediterranean Sea. So they dangled the flags facing the sea, hoping an allied French or British ship would see them. And indeed, a French battleship did. And he sent in a boat to see what was going on, and when he heard there was 4,000 Armenians there, he said, that's a lot of people. let me cable Paris to see what they want me to do. But while waiting for the response to Paris, he said, let me show the Turkish army what a French dreadnought can do. And he proceeds to shell the Turkish side of the mountain, buying the time the Armenians need for the three-word response they have prayed for. Rescue the Armenians. And so he would rescue the Armenians, and actually years after the war they would resettle in a strip of land called Anjar in Lebanon on the Lebanese-Syrian border. Now, I've been to Anjar twice in my life, and the first time I went with Hajik. Here is the monument in the village square. Looks like a cross, but also a sword. This is one of the churches in Anjar. You will see battleships. There are not a lot of churches, mosques, or synagogues where a battleship is appropriate, but it is in Anjar, because never before has a battleship been quite such an answered prayer. And because I was traveling with Hajik, we were taken to a special relic room where we could see some of the rifles the men had used, one of the Red Cross flags the women had sewn, and the canisters that once held the ashes of the martyrs of Mustafa. In 1990, the Anjaris, on the 75th anniversary, created this beautiful, beautiful mural to Mustafa. And there are so many panels that I cherish. This is one, but this is the other. It's the mountain. It might be Mustafa, but also it's a bit like Ararat. And if you read the Armenian in the column, in the block, it says, let them come again. We are still the mountain. Let them come again. We are still the mountain. The first half, a warrior's rallying cry. The second half, a conscious or unconscious reference to the diaspora. Today, there are roughly 10 million Armenians in the world. The majority of us, the vast majority of us, descendants of that final 500,000. Roughly 3 million live in Armenia. The rest of us, we live in Watertown. Or Detroit. Or Paris. Or Beirut. But it doesn't matter. Because we still have our churches. We still have our language. We still have our schools, our stories, our soul. We are still the mountain. I remember years ago, the first time I went to Armenia. I had a lovely week. But every time I looked to the southwest toward Ararat, I never saw the summit. It is a shy mountain and a tall one. On my last day there, however, checked out of my hotel, went to the airport, Air France Gate 6, checked in, and as I was standing at the gate, a gate most of you or many of you know, I looked to the southwest, and before my very eyes, the clouds parted, and I took this photograph. There she was. And suddenly, I was weeping. And my wife can tell you I do not weep easily. I have the emotional depth of a mollusk. Because I was weeping because I knew the importance of my novel on the Armenian Genocide. I had to get it right this time. Now, if I were giving this presentation to you a few months ago, I would end here. But I want to give you an epilogue. I began by talking about family, real and imagined. I showed you some old family photographs. This winter I came across an old Armenian encyclopedia. In it, I saw this photograph. There he was, Nazareth Bedros, my great-grandfather. The story that had always come down to my generation about Nazareth was that he was a tailor, maybe dabbled as a writer. No, we had it wrong. He was a poet who later may have dabbled as a tailor. Here's what we learn in that 5-page presentation of who Nazareth was. He was a prodigy, taken when he was 13 years old from Kayseri to Jerusalem to Constantinople. He was not simply writing his own poems, he was a troubadour. he was singing them. And throughout his teens and his 20s, he was, for lack of a better term, a Bruce Springsteen of the Anatolian plain. He had great crowds, and his poems were almost Walt Whitman-esque in their celebration of Kayseri and the people. Then something happened. In a run-up to the Armenian Genocide known as the Hamidian Massacres, Sultan Abdul Hamid II slaughtered 250,000 Armenians, a number which, were it not for the Armenian Genocide, would cause us all to gasp. On November 18, 1895, the massacres came to Kayseri, and my great-grandfather's work changed. He wrote his epic, a 70-quatrain poem about the Hamidian massacres with these stanzas among them, and this is just a few. They killed infidels with axes, daggers, and didn't ask who you were, whether merchant or coolie. They took the babies out of the wombs of their mothers, and those who witnessed lost their minds. Think Komitas. I've always been so proud to be my father's son. I've always been so proud to be my grandfather's grandson. But it is only at midlife that I've discovered how proud I am to be my great-grandfather's great-grandson. Novelists talk with an agonizing amount of hubris about where they found their voice. I found my voice 13, 14 books ago when I was a much younger novelist. But I'd always assumed that I was the first Bohjalian to try to understand the genocide through art. I am so honored and humbled to know I am but the second, which is why the Sandcastle Girls not merely gave me my heart, it gave me my soul. And I am happy to answer your questions about anything. And the first question is always the hardest for you and for me. Yes?
So do you find traveling to Turkey as an Armenian, obviously on an American passport, is there any reaction or what type of reception do you get?
What type of reception do I get traveling to Turkey with an Armenian last name? Well, first of all, there are about 60,000 Armenians in Istanbul. And here's the other thing that's important to note. While the culture, the centralized education is still deeply denialist, the textbooks, for example, that are mandated out of Ankara essentially paint Armenians as, satanic. The reality is that there are so many people in Istanbul who would love to see their country man up and acknowledge its past crimes. It's very much the way Americans wanted the government to increase and improve its civil rights record in the 1960s in the United States. I feel a parallel to that. Now, that point notwithstanding, when I'm not in Istanbul, it's a different experience. And certainly since I spend most of the time when I'm not in Istanbul either down by Diyarbakir or Dikanagat or up by Van or Kars, which is really an interesting place to be because Kars is not merely Kurdish, it is filled with former Azeri refugees too. So it's really popular when I'm in Kars. But the irony is that so many Kurds in Western Armenia acknowledge the genocide. They're not going to give us back the land. But Ahmet Turk, a Kurdish parliamentarian in the Turkish government, in February apologized to the Armenians for the blood on the hands of his grandparents. Sir Girgos is a magnificent church restoration, Armenian church restoration in Diyarbakir that was funded more than half by the Kurdish municipality, despite the fact there are not Armenian church services there right now. It's but it was done as a show of good faith. Once the Kurds know, in my experience, that you're not going to pull a document out of your wallet and take their land from them, they can be quite hospitable. You could witness Asia's son-in-law. That doesn't mean that there isn't a denialist strain that will infuriate you as you go through Western Armenia. A teenage girl in Chankush, when my wife said, "What happened at the Dudon and Crevasse?" said, "I don't know. I think a few Armenians didn't think and fell in." Yeah, my wife said, "Yeah, lemmings," and just walked in. So there's that. And it's a wrenching emotional experience because you see that this was once our homeland, and now it's not. And the graffiti and the sacrilege is infuriating. And yet, I always feel this ancestral DNA connection. This sense that my ancestors once walked this land, and by coming back, I'm paying them respects in some way. Probably more than you needed to know, but a great question. Okay, I'm going to tell you one other. Oh, no, go ahead. I'll go to the next question. Yes.
Why did you feel that your narrator had to be a female version of you and couldn't be you?
Why did I feel that my narrator had to be a female version of me? First of all, because I think your gender is way more interesting than my gender. You know, my daughter, she's a young actor, she read Close Your Eyes, Hold Hands on audio. And she said something so astute when she read the rough draft. She said, "Dad, take this as a compliment because I mean it that way. But your sweet spot as a writer is seriously messed up young women." And I think she's onto something. But the main reason why I did it is because it seemed to me that a woman would be more likely than a man to risk her emotional equilibrium, all that she knows about her family, based on a single photograph. Great question.
Both of my parents were genocide survivors. They're both deceased, gone. And I've always wanted to just sit and write their stories, if for no other reason than to pass down to generations. But it occurred to me one day that as you write these stories...
Now, I'm going to just ask you, I'm seeing some hands. If you get to the question, I'd be so awesome. I'd be so grateful.
Fiction. It's always fiction. It falls under the category of fiction. Am I right?
The question is this. If you want to write your grandparents' stories or your parents' stories, does it always fall under fiction? No. No. But if you're going to do nonfiction, you've got to have the primary source materials. I want to draw your attention, if you're interested in this, to a spectacular book that was published this week. It's called Fragments of a Lost Homeland, Remembering Armenia by Armin Marsubian. Armin's book works not simply because he's a gifted scholar, but he had three huge assets. His grandfather's diary, his great aunt's diary, and the fact that his grandfather was part of a pair of brothers who were the Dildilian photographers. So from all of their photographs and these two diaries, he was able to write an incredible memoir of what that family experienced, all that they lost, and how they survived between 1915 and when they finally left in 1923 for the United States. It's a great question, but if you don't have the raw source materials, it has to be fiction. I saw a hand right. Or not. Is there one last question? I thought I saw so many hands. Yes.
So I have a question about the American Missionaries. In your book, they seem, so hopeless, but there were some good missionaries out there.
The question is this: why do the missionaries of the Sandcastle Girls seem so hopeless? There are great missionaries out there. They were. Absolutely. The reason why Elizabeth Endicott went to Mount Holyoke is because Mount Holyoke had two English and Armenian-speaking seminaries, and Beach was in Van during immediately before and up to the genocide. Some of our most amazing Western accounts of the genocide and horrific are by the likes of Grace Knapp, missionaries. When I'm creating characters, I'm interested first and foremost in interesting characters. People who will keep you turning the pages. And the two points on a compass that matter most in fiction are conflict and human transformation. That means having people in oppositional forces. I need things to make Elizabeth's life a living hell, especially when it comes to a beautiful little Hatun. And that is where, yes, there are two really annoying missionaries. You're absolutely right. And no one's ever brought this up to me. I think what you said is really smart. I almost think that, Grace Knapp and some of her peers are looking and saying, why? Cut us some slack. That's a great point. Yes, all the way in the back.
How likely was there to be a Muslim doctor in the hospital?
How likely was there to be a Muslim doctor in the hospital? Very likely in Aleppo in 1915. How likely was there to be a righteous doctor like Syed Akçam? That's more difficult to find. But there were. I mean, the reality is that children lived. And I chose the name, just for the record, Syed Akçam, as a shout-out to Clark University Turkish scholar Taner Akçam, because of Taner's groundbreaking work on the Armenian Genocide. Great question. Yes?
One more. Do you have another story to tell?
Do I have another story to tell?
Do you think your genocide stories are over?
I think my stories, my novels of the Armenian Genocide are over, yes. What I would love to do next, or at some point I will do, is just make sure that there are novels about how incredibly awesome and wonderful it is to be Armenian. And that, it's not, we are not defined by a genocide. We are defined by all of the wonderful things that define any group of people. And there will be that down the road for sure.
Thank you for writing the story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.